All right, so we're still having some people trickle in, so I guess I'll give it another 30 seconds or so before we get started. All right, so looks like the number of attendees has started to slow down. So in the interest of time, let's go ahead and get started. So thank you for coming to today's session, which is the planning, design, and management of pedestrian and bicyclist facilities. My name is Owen Hitchcock, and I'll be moderating this session. We have 3 presentations today with our speakers, Richard Montanez from the City of Philadelphia, Nathan George from RK&K, and Laura Aramajan from Kittleson and Associates. So we'll hold questions until the end, but throughout the presentations, go ahead and type your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to all the questions at the end. So first up is Richard Montanez. Richard is Deputy Streets Commissioner for Transportation for the City of Philadelphia. He's responsible for maintaining, operating, and improving approximately 2,500 miles of local roads, 3,000 traffic signals, 280 bridges, over 100,000 streetlights, and 18,000 alley lights in the City of Philadelphia. He is also responsible for the development and implementation of the Transportation Division's strategic plan. So Richard, it's all yours.
Am I okay with the screen?
Yep.
All right. So when I was first asked to talk about what Philadelphia is doing for a pedestrian bicyclist kind of way, we actually are more doing for businesses, but it kind of allowed me to voice our what the city's doing, what we have in mind, and what's going on with us. So obviously, sorry, got to get used to this. Is totally different than being in person, just to let you know. So as we all know, one of the first things we did, we usually close one of our drives that goes by Schuylkill River for recreational on the weekends. So we decided to do 24 hours a day, 7-day-a-week closure on this drive. This allows social distancing, bicycling, running, walking, whatever you would like to do to provide for social distancing. And this works great because it connects to it just adds to the great trail network that the City of Philadelphia has, and we continue to grow. So we do keep expanding the high quality bike network throughout the city and those areas where people can jog, bike, and safely. But what I really wanted to talk about what Philadelphia has done in the COVID world when it comes to pedestrians and things. It's actually we've provided more outdoor spacing for our restaurants and cafe. We do realize that restaurants are a vital part of this community, and they're the local businesses. They're the ones out there all the time. They're the small employers who employ a lot of residents, citizens of both Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. So we decided to start working with them to come up with some ideas of how to adapt to COVID rules, how to maintain 6-foot spacing. So we went out there and tried to reopen the restaurants safely after they were closed for about 30 days. It was tough. There were only allowed takeout. We did create regulatory regulations out there, temporary regulatory regulations that allowed loading zones without them having to apply for permits. All they had to do was request them at will. So we have 4 types of what we call streeteries, and it's quite interesting on the word. It became as there is an entire restaurant task force. The word streetery comes over because I work for the streets department. So I like the word street, and so it just ended up being Streetery. So we do have several types of streeteries out there. Sidewalk Café, what we call a streetery, which is actually physically in the streetery. We temporarily close the streets. And then obviously we are encouraging parking lots and things like that. So some of the drawings that we provide, this presentation is normally about 70, 80 pages long. So I had to quickly cut it down just to get it in the 10-minute presentation that we have. But what we do is we provide footprints for the businesses of what they need to do, what's socially acceptable from the city of Philadelphia, from the health department, from L&I, streets department. And so they all get this guidance that it's on our website and anybody can access it. Please feel free to use it, distribute it, where it shows what you should be doing. If your sidewalk is 10 feet or more, this is what you can do. If it's less than 10 feet, we do not allow streeteries, and this has been an ongoing battle with some of them as we keep enforcing the rules and regulations. But as you can tell, and I mainly kept the, I mainly kept the drawings that we provide, the layouts, as guidance for our restaurants in this presentation, as to show them what they got to do. One of the biggest things we did as we were inspecting out there was we found that they were putting tables on top of cellar doors. That is not permitted. We don't allow it. And the interesting was that we had to keep this very fluid as the rules of COVID change from 2 seating to 4 seating to 6 seating. City of Philadelphia is back to only 4 people per table currently. We have to make sure that we keep our website up to date and that are able. We're also now looking at winterizing this, so putting outdoor heaters. Some are gas, some are electric, propane. So we've been slowly working with them, working with the fire department to see what's allowed by code to allow them. This is one of the first streetery examples that we provide. So as you can see, we still provide some parking. You have to keep certain distances from the fire hydrant. You have 7 feet to go. There's some barriers that we're asking them to put in, and crash-worthy barriers for so that people feel safe when they're eating out there. And as you see, if you get a chance to travel and walk through Philadelphia, you'll see that they keep changing as they go along and as we hit the winter. Some of them are starting to build platform streeteries. This came about because of the ADA issues we were trying to address at the same time. So we did one, while you were still eating outside, we still wanted you to have ADA accessible tables. So if you have one on the sidewalk, we consider that to be your ADA accessible table. If you didn't, if you're using the street, we were requesting that you make that ADA accessible. There you go. We also, and I apologize for this map, I try to get it so many times and it just keeps coming completely blurry. For some, in a previous version I have, it looks fine. We did put out there the areas where they're completely prohibited, where you can not have any streeteries. So we provided the information. This was quite controversial in the beginning. Most of these are state roads where streeteries are prohibited, such as like Broad Street, Market Street. But however, your sidewalks are wide enough that you are allowed a sidewalk cafe. It's an example of a street closure. We do something like this in our midtown. We completely close the street down, put a 10-foot pedestrian bicyclist walkway. There are signs up there. Actually, bicyclists are encouraged to walk their bikes through this block, but in the meantime, provides access to everyone. As you can see, we also provide ramps for everybody to be accessible. This is a partial one, what we're currently trying to create. We're doing samples of this on Rittenhouse, where we're allowing one travel lane while still providing outdoor dining for our restaurants. And we feel like this is going to be the ongoing example and what will probably the city of Philadelphia will remain as. Obviously, there are some where we're trying to provide, instead of using the parking lane for streetery, they actually become your pedestrian access. So provide the proper pedestrian ADA accessible area for them while still addressing businesses and things like that. Private parking lots, we also encourage them. We also work with them as restaurants bring out the tables from inside and they're putting them outside. So to maintain social distancing, make sure all the proper COVID regulations and rules are in place, and that they're able to still conduct their business, serve people. There will be more of these as we winterize the areas. We're dealing with tents, with air exchange, airflows, and all necessary things from the health department. With that, I try to do it really quick. I'd like to say I was the one who did all this, but I didn't. There's literally 30 of us from the city of Philadelphia that are working on this, that are doing this every day, that we go out there, we inspect streeteries, and we look to see how to make it better. I do want to tell the group that one of the biggest things, and on Tuesday, I was out at Manayunk, Main Street, inspecting streeteries. And what everybody came to us and said was, can we keep them? Because these are actually slowing people down. One of the things we've noticed, the side effect, I guess, to doing streeteries is that the vehicular volumes have completely slowed down. Where we used to have 25 to 30 miles per hour, they're going now 15 to 20 miles per hour in the areas where the streeteries are at. So we feel the safety impact is there. We just want to make sure that we put a proper design in the public right of way that both FHWA, PennDOT, and the city would accept and would make it safer for all of them. So with that, I want to turn it over, I guess, back to the group because we're waiting for questions to the end. And I believe I got it on time. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Richard. Yeah, again, just feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box during the presentations, and we'll get to them at the end. So next up, we have Nathan George. Nathan is the bicyclist and pedestrian practice lead at RK&K. He specializes in planning and design of low-stress bicycle facilities and ADA-compliant pedestrian routes in urban, suburban, and rural environments. And as a specialist in intersection design, Nathan emphasizes multimodal safety and design, leveraging both emerging approaches to safety and proven design techniques. So Nathan, take it away.
Thanks, Owen. So first up, I wanted to address the glaring issue on the program that Matthew Ridgway I invited to co-present with me for this session, and he had a family emergency arise, but he is the DC practice leader for Fair and Piers, and we collaborate on a number of projects like this. So we're going to talk about our protected bike lane support in Washington, DC. And we did want to give a shout out and credit to the District Department of Transportation, or DDOT, who was our client, who collaborated with us on a lot of this work. And so just highlighting the folks who are here on the screen: Megan Carnegie, Mike Goodnow, Will Hansfield, George Branyan, and Jim Sebastian, and also a honorary shout out to Darren Buck, who's currently at Federal Highways, who was involved when we got all of this started. So the primary focus of this presentation is going to be on the 21st and 22nd Street protected bike lane, or what we called the Downtown West before the alignment was set. So just to give you an idea of what we were looking at, there were three overarching goals of this task. It was the most planning-based task because we didn't have a current plan. So we wanted to highlight some of the metrics that helped us identify a route. And the goal there was to identify a specific path that was comfortable and a safe place for people to bike. So providing that separated multimodal environment in this area. Carrying forward the long-range planning objectives that DC has outlined in their Move DC multimodal plan, and then also advancing their Vision Zero objectives that have been outlined by Mayor Bowser. So Move DC, the district has a plan to put in separated bike lanes, protected bike lanes, or cycle tracks, whichever terminology is most familiar to you, throughout the downtown area and throughout the district, really. Those are highlighted in purple here. Our task included 3 separate areas of DC. It was roughly 10 or so miles of area that we were covering, doing planning and design for these key facilities. We'll focus primarily on the lower left side, the green bike lanes in Downtown West, but we'll also have some highlights from the crosstown shown in blue at the top. and the red lines, the eastern downtown section. So I'll touch on each of those, but primarily we're focused on the green lines. So in the Move DC plan, that plan envisioned putting a facility on 21st Street, the purple line that goes north to south. It's shown in this excerpt from the plan. And so when we initially started the task, DDOT came to us with the objective, let's look at that corridor, but let's look at the parallel streets to see where would the facility be most appropriate, and also what would be the appropriate design of that facility. So we had to identify the appropriate street and also identify what the facility type would be. One of the highlights that really stands out when you look at this map, where it shows the existing bike infrastructure, is that there's good east-west connectivity and a little bit of diagonal north to south connectivity in the northern portion of the study area, but there really is no north-south connectivity. And so that was the focus of our assignment. So when you get started on a project like this, it's very nice to have the opportunity to study and determine what's appropriate without having a pre-described facility to design or to plan. So having that multiple opportunities, different streets we could look at, different facility types that we could incorporate was very beneficial. And Farron Pierce started with a very robust analysis of what are the opportunities along each of the corridors, what are some of the high-level considerations to help us pare that down to something that was a more manageable task of reviewing individual facility designs. So we couldn't look at everything in a detailed design, but we could at least conduct a screening. So that's where this flow chart comes in. We knew that providing one-way bike lanes on multiple streets would be too impactful. We understand that would require a lot of parking impacts. So it really limited us to looking at two-way facilities. And to look at two-way facilities, we needed to look at what were the impacts along each street on either side of the street to identify a preferred side of the street to review. So we were looking for things like parking impacts, high volume driveways, any sort of condition along the street that would be an obstruction that would be difficult to design around. So through that flow chart process, we identified 3 facility types that made the most sense. 22nd Street on the east side, 21st Street on the east side, and 20th Street on the west side. So the next step was to take those initial high-level reviews and put them into practice. So we developed roll plots. Farron Pierce developed the roll plots initially on this with some input from our folks, looking at traffic and operations and parking, to really start to drill down on what would the impacts of that facility be if it were implemented at a high level, just at a concept level, so we could really nail down what were some of the trade-offs as we needed to compare each of those alternatives and come up with a preferred design. To do that requires a very robust look at what are some of the trade-offs and impacts that need to be evaluated, not just from a design perspective, but also from a safety and operations perspective. So we looked very carefully at a number of metrics to help provide both a qualitative and quantitative evaluation of each of those alternatives. So this chart, I'm not going to walk through each of the details, but just to highlight, we looked at details like where do we have left turn conflicts? And we looked at traffic volumes to see how many turning vehicles would be on conflict with that facility. So that helps to quantify where we have high volume conflicts versus low volume conflicts. Look at mitigation strategies like separated signal phases. So we could really identify where we needed to apply some more detailed traffic engineering countermeasures to make that facility safe, or maybe that would be a reason that facility type may not be as appropriate. And then we also did a complete inventory of the parking and looked at parking utilization and turnover to make sure we understood not just where parking impacts occurred, but where we might have some capacity in the corridor and where special uses like taxi, loading, or other special uses, special curbside uses as the term is very popular today. We had to look at all of those to make sure that they were accounted for. Flashing up, this is from the Eastern Downtown study. One of the big highlights from that, from the review of those 2 corridors, was we also looked at any design challenges, anything that didn't meet design minimums, so what we would consider a design waiver or design exception. kind of a detail, and we made sure to screen all of those, which helped us for comparison of those two corridors, which is really important as you're looking at the concept level to see where you may be making exceptions to design standards that are would favor one corridor or one facility type over another. So a couple of representative photos to give you an idea of the area we're talking about. Clearly, I'm talking about downtown DC. So this is a very urban environment. It has a lot of special curbside uses. There are downtown pocket parks. There are big buildings that are located adjacent to wide sidewalks, and in some cases narrow sidewalks. So there's a lot of that urban infrastructure in this specific 21st and 22nd Street example that I'm primarily emphasizing. But you'll see we also had some varied environments in the other corridors that were more similar of like a suburban type environment. So just wanted to highlight that. So here's the three corridors. One of the interesting outcomes as we looked at these three streets, we found a number of challenges in each one, and this was a very involved process with the community to ask, what was preferred, what were the impacts that were undesirable, and big challenges that we heard from the community were related to parking, as everybody would probably imagine on this call, especially if you've worked on a bike project before. Parking impacts are a big challenge, and we're in a downtown environment where we were doing lane repurposing. So those lanes that were taken away would have a direct correlation to how much parking we were removing. There were a number of concerns about interconnectivity with the other facilities that are in the corridor. So there was a lot of push to make sure the facilities were all interconnected. So what we ended up with was actually a hybrid facility where we provided the design on 21st Street south of G Street, and then provided a facility transition on G Street to go up 20th Street to complete the connection. And that was a real complication towards the end of the project, just to make sure that we could facilitate that transition between the two streets. But what I consider to be a very valuable lesson from that process is having that flexibility as you're working through the evaluation process, making sure you can react to the input and find a design that's workable to get that into implementation. As we worked through those details, we refined and produced the metrics that I shared with you earlier just for the preferred alternative, so the community could understand the impacts, how much parking was taken away, what were some of the considerations in terms of like reduced level of service at intersections. So all of those details were shared out in an outreach. So this was the front and back of our flyer, just to share that information with the community. To close, just going to give you guys a couple of highlights from the areas that have been implemented. So this is that Crosstown or Irving Street project where we did a separated bike lane that was median located. This is showing a transition to a shared use path at one of our termination points. So we had signalization there to accommodate a facility transition. And then here's a picture from the overpass. We went through an interchange on this facility design. So that shows where that facility was median located, running through a cloverleaf interchange, which was a really, that was a pretty easy exercise of just putting down these pieces of infrastructure to separate folks, but it does require a lot of consideration at the intersections that we had to go through, like that previous example. Final example here from that 21st and 22nd Street design. So this is a portion that was just implemented, and DDOT's continuing work on that to get that facility complete as well. So that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to discuss in a bit more detail in Q&A.
All right. Thanks, Nathan. Finally, we have Laura Oranjan. Laura is a transportation planner and urban designer at Kittleson & Associates, who's passionate about using multimodal transportation solutions to make communities safer and more accessible. The hallmark of her work is effectively coordinating among federal, state, and local agencies, stakeholders, and communities to resolve conflicts and lay the groundwork for successful implementation of projects. So Laura, it's all yours.
Okay, great. And Owen, can you just confirm that you're seeing the correct screen?
Yes, I see it correctly.
Okay, great. So today I'm going to be talking about how we can leverage large-scale highway reconstruction projects to help expand multimodal networks. And I'll be focusing on the I-83 bicycle planning study in the city of Harrisburg for that. So just as a quick bit of context, when we're talking about highway reconstruction, this is a huge opportunity to expand the multimodal network. We look at the history of the creation of highways. We see them bulldozing neighborhoods, creating disconnected communities through the 1950s and 60s. But as those structures start to finish up their design life and need to be reconstructed, these are large-scale projects that require a significant influx of state and federal funding resources for reconstruction. And as we think about how we're reconstructing those highways, we really want to think about not replacing them in kind. We don't want to put back exactly what was there before, but we want to think about what we're doing to the local street network around the highway, what we're doing underneath and adjacent to the highways, and really looking at these as a chance to create more connected communities. And with the huge amount of money that's being spent on these, it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity to incorporate bicycle and pedestrian facilities into the design to help get those built as part of the cost. And just for context, if you think about the I-95 reconstruction project here in the city of Philadelphia, one piece of that is costing around $2 billion, another piece of it is costing $5 billion, and this I-83 project is costing over $1 billion. So adding in some bicycle and pedestrian facilities, as one of my favorite project managers likes to say, is just pennies. So the I-83 Capital Beltway project, this is a major highway widening and reconstruction project through the city of Harrisburg, just south of the downtown. And currently the highway really operates as a divider between two residential neighborhoods, Allison Hill and Southside. And the project was in preliminary design when the city reached out to us to think about, you know, they have a lot of bicycle and pedestrian facilities that they want to see in this area, and think about ways to incorporate that into the design of I-83. So we took a comprehensive look at the larger study area outlined here in blue, and at where the crossings of I-83. And we started by looking at what are the previous proposals for bicycle facilities in the study area? What's on the wish list from the city? What are they looking to achieve in the long term? And we really did an analysis of the existing and the proposed network using the bicycle level of traffic stress methodology, as well as some other existing conditions looking at traffic volumes, crashes, current conditions, to kind of get a sense of what is the ideal proposed bicycle network throughout the entire study area. And then once we have that proposed network, how can we drill down to the crossings of I-83 to see where we cross 83 with that proposed network, what can be done at the cross sections of the underpasses and overpasses of the highway to incorporate designs for those proposed facilities into the final design of the highway. In order to do that, we developed concept designs for enhanced bicycle and pedestrian facilities on the surface streets where they cross I-83. As I mentioned, a key component of the analysis was looking at the bicycle level of traffic stress. Once again, for those of you not familiar, this is a measure of connectivity of the bicycle network via facilities the average person would feel comfortable using. We wanted to make sure that we were looking at this as a network and not just individual pieces of bicycle facilities. How does that network operate as a whole? Where can people get to using that network with a real focus on the low stress network, wanting to have facilities that the largest number of people can use. That 60% interested but concerned category of cyclists, what are facilities that they would feel comfortable using, and really looking at what is there today and what could be there with proposed facilities. So this was the map that we created of the LTS, and you can see the areas in green in Allison Hill and Southside are those low stress streets. So those are low stress today, relatively low volumes, low number of lanes. I would note that the methodology that we use for LTS, the new methodology for LTS includes traffic volumes as one of the pieces that goes into the equation. However, since we didn't have traffic volumes for this study, we used an older LTS analysis that does not use volumes. So we have a lot of low stress streets in the neighborhoods, but the connectors between them are typically very high stress, looking at 13th Street, 19th Street, and those crossings at I-83. We noted in blue the high conflict intersections as well. And this is the low stress travel shed. So basically where from the typical spot in each of these neighborhoods, where can you currently bike to on existing low stress streets? And we see that the neighborhoods themselves are fairly well connected from a low stress perspective, but you can't get in between them, and the highway is a real barrier to that. So working with the city of Harrisburg, going through their previous plans and kind of looking at what has been recommended in the past and what are some real projects that the city wants to focus on in the next few years to help implement a more connected bicycle network. So we looked at each of these, and when we ran the LTS analysis with these facilities, we can start to see a much more connected low stress network here with connections between Allison Hill and the South Side, as well as downtown and the riverfront. So that was our marching orders in terms of these are the facilities that we really want to focus on. And we identified 3 crossings of I-83, 13th Street, 17th Street, and 19th Street to look at expanding concepts. Some of the highway crossing design principles we used for these concepts are to maximize sidewalk width as much as possible to create a comfortable walking environment, to divide sidewalks into clear zones for pedestrian travel and a verge area to buffer pedestrians between the adjacent travel modes. We also wanted to separate and protect bicycle facilities where feasible. And as much as possible, we wanted to incorporate enhancements to the public realm to make for more attractive and inviting corridors for pedestrians to walk in between these 2 neighborhoods. Looking at things like lighting, specifically lighting of underpasses for pedestrians, decorative wall form liner designs, public art on fencing at overpass levels. And Rich, who is on the call as well, is all too familiar with some of the examples from I-95, which has really served as a pilot for some of the recommendations that we developed in the I-83 study. So looking at each of the crossings at 13th Street and the existing condition, you can see we have pretty narrow sidewalks. There is a barrier between the sidewalk and the travel lanes, but a very narrow walkway there. Some of the spots where the pedestrians are crossing the ramps. The ramps at 13th Street are actually going away. It's a current interchange, but those ramps are being removed. As a result, there's a significant amount of road volume that can be lessened here that's no longer going to be using the interchange. And so we thought that there was real opportunities for doing a bit of a road diet here. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide, the preliminary design proposed section. This was the preliminary design that had been done to date before we started our study of I-83. And you can see 6-foot wide sidewalks were proposed, 6-foot shoulder, no dedicated bicycle facilities, and they also had an 11-foot median gore, which, as I mentioned, since this is going away as an interchange, we thought that there could be an opportunity to reduce some of the travel lanes here. So the proposed section that we developed for 13th Street looks at expanding the sidewalk and having a 6-foot clear sidewalk zone for walking with a 4-foot verge, painted bike lanes 6 feet wide, dedicated space for the cyclists, and then 2 travel lanes, and removing that median gore. And in this opportunity, we actually looked to lessen the width of the proposed bridge section. And we also looked at doing decorative metal fencing on the overpass. The next location is 17th Street. This is an existing overpass over 17th Street. As you can see, the overpass doesn't have any lighting in it, so it's very dark for pedestrians. There is, just north of here is the heart of the Allison Hill neighborhood, which also has a complete streets project that the city is looking into that's just happening to the north. And this was also a location where the ramps just to the north of the highway proved to be very difficult for pedestrians to traverse with the angle of those crossings. So what we looked at doing here was extending that complete streets concept that's being developed north on 17th Street down here to the I-83 crossing, creating a 14-foot sidewalk zone with 4-foot verge, a Jersey barrier that's separating the pedestrians from the travel on 17th Street, decorative pedestrian lighting, and decorative form liners on the walls. We also looked in more detail at the location of the crosswalks, of the ramps here, to try to make those movements a little bit simpler for pedestrians and easier to traverse. And the final one that we looked at was the 19th Street. This is where the city had proposed a protected bicycle lane to the south of here. So we looked at extending that facility up to 19th Street. You can see the current proposed design from the preliminary design showed 6-foot shoulders, 11-foot lanes, and 6-foot sidewalks. So in our proposed section, we have a protected bike lane that is directly adjacent to the sidewalk. Once again, widening out that sidewalk as much as possible, adding in decorative metal fencing for the overpass, and protecting both the bicyclists and the pedestrians from travel lanes with a 3-foot raised curb. This design would widen the bridge section by 14 feet. And as a result of this, the city of Harrisburg was able to take these concepts to PennDOT and their engineers and work through. I wouldn't say that we got everything that we asked for, but they were able to incorporate a lot of the proposed improvements, especially the bicycle facilities, some of the decorative treatments. We didn't get quite as wide sidewalks as we were looking for, but we did get a lot of improvements for the pedestrian and bicyclist realm here. And some of the takeaways I wanted to give you is that comprehensive planning to identify a preferred multimodal network is key here. Instead of just looking at specific spot locations and saying, oh, we'd like to add this or that here, this would be good for a bike lane. How does it connect to that overall network that a community is trying to implement over time? Having early and ongoing coordination with the final design team, the sooner that you can get these types of improvements included in the highway design, the easier it is to incorporate it, and the easier it is to make sure that's not value engineered out later on in the process. And just really thinking about how you can leverage these very significant infrastructure investments to make long-term improvements to the multimodal network. This is the kind of reconstruction that comes along once in a generation. And if you miss the boat, you aren't going to get those bicycle facilities. You're not going to widen the bridge later on. So this is the chance to do it when it's in design and to really keep making sure that you're pushing those types of improvements forward. I have my email on the screen. If there are any additional questions, I'd love to chat with you more about it. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Laura. So I'll go ahead and read through some of the audience questions now. I see we already have a couple of them that have already been answered. And I see one in the Q&A box. If you haven't typed a question in the Q&A box, just go ahead and type it in now. So we have one here. I'm guessing it's for Laura. So it says, do you have any recommendations for incorporating pedestrian sidewalks or bicycle facilities through a limited access interchange overpass of 2 limited access highways? Or should bike and ped facilities be avoided within limited access highways?
Okay, so I mean, I'd say as much as possible, avoiding limited access. I mean, is this a crossing or is this actually incorporating the facility within a limited access roadway?
Let's say a crossing.
I mean, I think if there's a crossing, this is something that I know in the Pennsylvania Active Transportation Plan was something that came up a lot, is how we're handling crossings of these high volume roadways. I don't have anything quick and easy off the top of my head. Right. I think each one of these is a different animal. I think in general, where you can have more protected facilities, the better. As we're thinking about these high volumes, high speeds that are going through, the more protection that you can offer, the better off you're going to be. Any sort of mixing in that environment is just not going to work.
Okay, thanks. So I guess haven't seen any other questions, but I do have one for Nathan. So just, I guess, at a high level, how much opposition has the DC cycle track project received, and sort of how do you address that those obstacles?
Sure. I mean, I tried to highlight one of the bigger challenges that led to us selecting a hybrid facility on 2 streets instead of just staying along the same street, which was an example of reluctance to remove parking on one portion of the street and a disconnected street network in another part of the corridor. So we really had some constraints in that specific example, in the downtown west example, where we had to make concessions to work around some of the challenges. And that's a typical challenge when we're doing bike projects in urban areas specifically. Just talking about it at a high level, when we're dealing with projects and we don't have flexibility, if the scope of a project is so specific that it's either we do what we've been tasked to do or we don't get anything at all, that's a real challenge. So that it's most beneficial when there is some flexibility to react to community input or to opposition to a project, and take advantage of the low-hanging fruit, or find a way to work around those challenges. And I think having that flexibility in downtown west really helped us achieve that goal and get something that could be implemented. That's not always the possibility. So this is the first time I've talked about the Eastern Downtown project publicly since we completed the task. And that project had challenges on both corridors that we could not resolve. And that project currently is in limbo because politically and just for a number of reasons, the DDOT cannot advance the project. So, that's why it's really important to complete a good planning process to make sure that you get that support, that you understand what some of those constraints are, and you work around them through that part of the process, as opposed to getting farther into a design phase, having something that you're more closer to construction and getting that surprise after you've gotten too far down the road. The ways that are really critical to make sure that you make these projects happen, and I think COVID has helped us a little bit in some regard, is to make sure that you are engaging with the public early on throughout the process, reaching out to broader audiences. So it's not just the community, it's also stakeholders like transit commuters if you're in an area that has a lot of transit use, or maybe you've got key businesses that you need to be talking with. So making sure that you have very robust conversations, that you're working through that process and getting a lot of input. But a lot of times what you'll find is that people really do want the facilities and there's some reluctance. And as you work through that process, you can help identify resolution, find ways to work around what those complications are, and you can generate that consensus as you work through the process if you're working through it early enough to make sure that you can address folks' concerns. What we're hearing from the Irving Street, this will be my last point. What we're hearing from the Irving Street project is, we pushed that facility through a 6-lane divided highway and terminated into a 2-lane street that's an urban street within what would be like the neighborhood core of that area. And we only built 1 block that goes into the neighborhood. And we're now hearing that there's desire by the community, now that they have that facility in place, to extend the facility and impact more parking. So sometimes it's just being incremental and making sure that those projects get in, and once people can see the benefit of that facility, there's more desire to see that expanded on. So sometimes just getting something in the ground is a real help.
Good advice. Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, and so no more open questions. So I guess one last thing I want to do for Richard, if you'd like, there was this question that was, will Streeteries continue to be allowed once COVID is passed? I've been to several that are of pretty high quality and provide a great outdoor experience. So you did answer that the plan is to continue some version of this program. Is there anything that you know right now? Do you have any more details about this that you'd like to just share with people?
Sure. So we're looking to keep it going. We do realize the benefit not only for businesses but also from a safety aspect of traffic calming. Where some kind of form will stay. The question being is what. If you drive Center City right now, we have the majority of the parking closed. That becomes an issue of Center City businesses were thriving while people were coming into work and taking SEPTA, and now we're trying to keep them alive by having them do outdoor dining. The question being is they're utilizing currently, we realize that this is an emergency, so allowing them free use of the public right of way in order to ultimately keep them alive and look at the long-term goals. It's technically free use of the right of ways against every rule and regulation the government has. Then again, anybody who knows me knows that I like to break the rules. So anybody wants to blame me, you can sue me, whatever you want to do. I got big shoulders. I feel, and the task force feels that keeping businesses alive during COVID is more important than collecting $1 a linear foot for a business who's struggling. And businesses generate tax revenue, put people to work, which in turn, creates the government, which in turn creates private businesses. So it's a never-ending cycle, economic 101, I think it's finally. And so we're looking for ways to make something work out for everyone. The trade-offs and the benefits are just greater than we see. Issues also being is I had to learn a lot about different kind of codes in the building code, plumbing code, fire code. The current limiting factor happens to be with the plumbing code, you need so many restrooms per seating. So it will be the current restrictions that the restaurants have is they cannot exceed their current capacity. So if you had a 50 people capacity interior, you can only have 50 people exterior because that's your plumbing code. So we're still talking with this. A lot of them are looking like if this was stay, they would invest money. And if anybody gets a chance to go through Philly, they're elaborate. I mean, I got to inspect a couple of them and I keep inspecting them. They're spending $50,000, $60,000 to winterize these things. So these are very elaborate buildings now in the public right of way that we are trying to deal with amidst of COVID. So.
Well, thanks for the follow-up. So it looks like there's still no more questions. So I guess we can just finish up 10 minutes early. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I'd again like to thank our speakers for presenting today. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the conference. And I guess this concludes the session. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.